After the holidays, doctors get more calls from people realizing they need to find proper help for aging loved ones. WIFR reporter Alyssa Kelly talks with professionals about available resources to help both families and patients.
I think it's really important to know about geriatrics and to have a geriatrics provider.
During the holidays, we might see family members we don't often get together with. Medical experts say it's common for us to notice the state of our aging relatives.
You realize that they have deteriorated or that they have some memory issues or they're not doing well in their home, and so we often get an increase in visits after the holidays.
Dr. Jennifer Woodward is board certified in geriatrics and family medicine. She explains geriatric care focuses on taking care of older adults who have complex medical conditions.
And as we age and we have more complex conditions, we need more resources. And it's often best to kind of be aware of what those are, to start kind of looking into them and to know what you want before it becomes the time that you need it.
Tools and resources are available to help patients and families understand what they need as they age. Lifescape in Rockford is one of them.
We have a caregiver program that will help those caregivers that are caring for an elderly parent or a family member. We can just help them with doing a benefit screening to know what their family member or loved one is in need of, and then we can help them look for the proper resources that they might need at that moment.
Lifescape says it is also experiencing an uptick in calls with people needing help with gas and electric in the cold weather.
We do help with the LIHEAP program to help them with their gas and electric. They can definitely find that support. It is available in the community.
In the state line, Alyssa Kelly, WIFR News.
According to studies, 60% of older adults believe they were unlikely to need long-term services and support in the future, but evidence shows that 70% of older adults will need them at some point.